Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
The reality with the Cleveland Browns is they have a lot of problems, and there are not a lot of quick fixes for the kind of problems that they have, right? That is the negative reality of the Cleveland Browns. The positive part of that reality is that the Cleveland Browns, while they have a lot of issues, especially on the offensive side of the ball, wide receiver, offensive line, quarterback still needs a long-term solution, whether you think it's Shador or whether you think it's somebody in the draft this year, still need to look into a long-term answer at quarterback because we know the future is not Deshaun Watson or any of the other veterans that have been on this team in the last 5 years. So you're constantly looking for answers on the offensive side of the ball. And the bad news is that none of these answers are going to be super immediate. The good news is that there are answers out there. Contrary to popular belief, the Cleveland Browns will have cap space next year, right? Between the Deshaun Watson insurance, which he still has not been named on the active roster, so the Browns are still accruing that insurance. We'll see if he gets called up to the active roster within the next week or so, because this is, I think, he's in the last 10 days of his 14-day window, of his 21-day window to get put on the active roster. We'll see if he actually gets put on the active roster. He's been practicing for a couple of weeks now. So they're going to get the insurance for Deshaun Watson for most this year. They're going to get some relief from restructuring Deshaun Watson. They're also going to get relief from carryover cap. And that's going to leave them, probably about a $40 to $60 million free agent budget that they're going to be able to use this year. So they have some cash to spend in free agency, and they're going to have a lot of draft assets to use to be able to fix these problems. It would not be crazy to think that the Browns can at least get a baseline of some of the solves some of the answers that they need for the offensive line, for the wide receiver room, for the quarterbacks in one offseason. Will it pay off after that one offseason? That's a little bit more tricky, right? If you get a lot of young offensive linemen in the draft and you play them right away, you're probably going to have a lot of growing pains on the way to getting the good result that you want to get out of that offensive line. So maybe year one might not be a magical year for you, but much like with the Patriots, the second year or the third year might be where things start to hit for you. All that's to have the conversation about when we're actually at that point. But what I wanted to talk about today is what will be the 5 things that will determine the Browns' quarterback future this offseason, because I think there are 5 factors that will work together to kind of give the Browns their answer on what it is that they want to do at the quarterback position based on how things break down. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. Okay, so I have 5 things I think are going to heavily affect the Browns' decision as far as quarterback goes. I think there's going to be a lot to weigh here between the end of the season in January and the start of the draft in April. I think the Browns are going to do a lot of soul searching at this time, and a lot of things are going to change in this conversation about the draft from now until the start of the draft. Don't assume that the conversations we're having now are going to be the same conversations that we're having all the way in April, right? Remember last year's a perfect example of this. It was Cam Ward, Shador, 1 and 2 overall for most the end of last season. And then by the time we got to the draft, it was obvious Cam Ward was going number 1 overall, but there was a question of where Shedeur would go. And obviously that question would get even more exemplified. Well, not exemplified, but that question would be even bigger as the draft would continue with Shedeur. So understand that this conversation can change drastically from now until the start of the draft. And these are the things that can change that conversation. That's really what I want to talk about today. We're not talking about what you think about these prospects. We're not talking about your personal opinion. We're talking about, or my personal opinion. We're talking about the 5 things that can happen or will need to have a decision made upon that will greatly affect the Browns quarterback decision making here in the offseason. So let's start with number 1. Who's coaching the team? That is the number 1 most important factor. Who is coaching the Browns? That's going to make a huge difference in what kind of prospects the Cleveland Browns are looking for, if the Browns are looking for a prospect, and what would the long-term plan for that prospect be. A quarterback that Kevin Stefanski would want might be a lot different than a quarterback that, you know, a Grant Udesky would want out of Jacksonville or something like that, right? These things can vary very drastically, right? One coach might be a fan of a quarterback, another coach might not be a fan of a quarterback. So who's coaching the team is going to matter. And that's going to be a huge question mark for this football team, because a lot of us are in the belief that the Cleveland Browns are going to fire Kevin Stefanski. I don't know how it is that they can sell the fan base that things will change offensively in a credible manner if they don't fire the coach, right? And I don't think that they can sell it to the people in that locker room, most importantly, that things are going to be different next year if they keep the same head coach in place. Maybe my read on that is wrong. Maybe the locker room is completely fine with Kevin and accepting of why the offense hasn't been good in the last few years, and he's got nothing to explain to those guys, and that's not a factor. I find it hard to believe that it's not. I mean, the scoring has been pretty bad the whole season, and it was bad last season. I find it that you would have to explain that, right? So in order to do something that can change people's minds in that locker room about the state of the offense, you're probably going to have to fire Kevin. Now, if you keep Kevin, what Kevin looks for in a quarterback, we don't know. The only thing we know is that he really liked Dylan Gabriel, right? That's all we know about Kevin Stefanski's preferences at quarterback, is that he liked Dylan. And we can infer that that means that he would like somebody like a Dante Moore because they played in the same system in college. We can infer that that means that he likes a Mendoza more because Mendoza plays more of a traditional pro style that reminds folks of people that Kevin has worked with in the past, right? He reminds folks of Kirk Cousins. He reminds folks of Jared Goff, Matt Ryan. These are all names that slot into a very familiar archetype of quarterback that Kevin has worked with in the past, right? The traditional drop back passer is what I'm talking about here. So maybe Kevin prefers that. Maybe Kevin doesn't like any of these quarterbacks. And again, you can ask yourself the question of what it is that whoever you would hire would like in a quarterback, what they want in a leader going forward, right? That might be something that matters. Maybe you hire somebody who doesn't like the leadership style of Shedeur and wants to go after somebody who has a different leadership style, and that could change things up drastically. If you don't think the Browns and who's coaching this team or who's the head coach of this team is going to have an effect on what they do at the quarterback position, I feel like that's just very misguided, right? What they do at head coach is going to greatly affect the quarterback position. It could make things better for Shedeur. It could make things worse for Shedeur. It could make things better for one of these prospects. It could make things worse for one of these prospects. But the idea that a coach is going to get hired here or you're going to fire Kevin and bring in a new coach and that's not going to change anything, I think would be misguided. So who's coaching the team? That's number one, right? For me, that's going to matter a ton. Kind of related to number one is number two. What is the evaluation of this draft class within the building itself? I know what people on Twitter think. I know what my friends who scout think. I know what I think based on my own review of the tape. And I know what a lot of you guys think about this draft class. But what we don't know, and what I don't even think the Browns know yet, is what they truly feel about this quarterback class. Are they equally as big of a fan of Fernando Mendoza as Dante Moore? Are they more into one player or the other? Is this a 2016 situation where the Browns could have the number 2 pick, but Jared Goff goes number 1 and the Browns decide to trade back because they're not big fans of Carson Wentz, right? Is this one of those situations? We don't know, right? So before we even talk about what the Browns draft position is, we got to know where the minds are of the people who are running this operation, right? What does the head coach think of Shedeur? That matters. What does the head coach think of this draft class? That matters. What does the general manager think of Shedeur and his progress and what his timeline looks like? And what does the general manager think of this draft class and what this draft class's timeline will look like, right? Does he think it's a similar timeline to what Shedeur is on? Does he think that these guys could be significantly better than Shedeur? All of that stuff matters a ton. That before we even get to draft position, that right there is the bulk of the decision, right? Because if the Browns had trust, like so let's say it's Kevin and Andrew, and they love this draft class, and they love Dante Moore, and they love Fernando Mendoza, if they get a chance to draft one of those guys, they're going to do it. But if they don't feel that way about them, then they're going to use this pick as a piece to trade back more than likely. So those two things at the top of this list matter the most more than anything that we see by the end of this season. It matters the most more than where the Browns are drafting. That is going to determine the Browns' appetite for a quarterback in this draft. Let's go to number 3. Number 3 is, what is the Browns' draft position? What position are they in to take a quarterback? Are they in a position to take a quarterback even if they like a quarterback? And then adding on top of that, right, factors 1 and 2, do they like these quarterbacks enough to be able to sweeten the pot to guarantee that they can take a quarterback? That's going to determine a lot. If the Browns are picking all the way back at 7, they're more than likely not taking a quarterback in this draft class. If the Browns are picking at 1 or 2, then they're more than likely taking a quarterback if they like the guys at the top of this draft class. Number 4 starts to matter here, which is, and this is a huge one, does Dante Moore declare? This is big. This is possibly outside of figuring out where the Browns draft, right? So the Browns season is going to end around the first weekend of January, which means we'll know what the Browns draft position is by then. January 23rd is what I believe to be the deadline for declaring for the draft for players in the college football playoff. That's going to be the second most important date. So the end of the season, we know where the Browns are drafting. January 23rd, that's an important date because that's the deadline to declare, and that's when we will know who's in this class and who's not in this class. And when we bring that up, we're talking about Dante Moore. Dante Moore is the ultimate wild card in this class. I think that there is a good chance that if he declares, he could end up becoming the number 1 overall pick, superseding Fernando Mendoza because he's younger. And I think his arm is a little bit more live. And he has 5-star pedigree, which goes a long way for NFL coaches, whether you think that's right or wrong, right? Like he has all the stuff that somebody would say to themselves, a number 1 overall pick should have. He's gotten comps of CJ Stroud while in college. Like, he's a really, really strong prospect, I think, on a similar level to a Mendoza. And I can see in certain ways somebody favoring him over a Fernando Mendoza for the reasons I just mentioned before. His accuracy profile is similar, even though Mendoza has a better accuracy profile. It's similar. He's younger. He has a better arm. All of these things factor in. He's also a little bit better, more mobile of an athlete too. But we won't know about him until January 23rd, because that's when his deadline is to declare for the draft, right? It's a different deadline for players in the CFP. If Dante Moore declares, then where the Browns are picking, that opens up a little bit, right? All of a sudden, if you're the third pick and Dante Moore doesn't declare, quarterback's off the market for you, because likely it's going to be Fernando Mendoza going either number one or number one in this draft, right? And maybe there's a lane to trade for him, maybe there's not, but it's probably going to be expensive because he's the only quarterback in the draft that people are going to trade up for. If Dante Moore is there, then that opens up the possibilities for the Cleveland Browns to maneuver around and get a quarterback. So if you are team, you want the Browns to draft the quarterback, you should be wanting, whether you want Dante Moore or not, you should want him to declare for the draft, unless the Browns end the season with the number one overall pick, which is possible, right? I think it's like an 18% chance. But if that's what you want, right? You want the Browns to take a quarterback. You want the Browns to have the best chance of them taking a quarterback. You want Dante Moore to declare. If he does that, Browns' odds of getting a quarterback open up dramatically. If he does not declare, which if you are a team, you don't want the Browns to draft a quarterback this year, you should want the only quarterback to declare to be Fernando Mendoza. Because if that happens, then only really one team's going to be in position to take him. More than likely, it's going to be a team that's either willing to trade up, or the Las Vegas Raiders get the number one overall pick and they take him, which is likely that could happen, right? I think that's like a 30% chance now that could happen. Then obviously, even if the Browns are two, they're not going to be in range for a quarterback, right? Because there's only one. So that's kind of how that has to play out, right? That matters a ton. Does Dante Moore declare? I think it's the most underrated factor of this whole thing. Now, will he declare? I'm not here to tell you whether that's going to happen or not. Some people seem to be dead set on the fact that he's returning. Some people are just looking at what he's done this season and saying to themselves, there's really no reason for him to return, especially with this offensive coordinator taking the head coaching job at Kentucky. It's like there's nothing else for him to accomplish at college. He already could be the number one overall pick this year. Why defer till next year, where that class is going to be a little bit more difficult to be at the top of, simply because there's a kid named Arch Manning in that class. And regardless of what you think about Arch Manning, I'm not a big fan of Arch Manning as a prospect yet, but regardless of what you think of Arch, his last name is Manning. He can walk and chew bubble gum. They're going to draft him number one overall. We got to act like we know what the deal is there, right? It's not going to take much for that kid to go number one overall, because his last name is Manning, and the Manning brand has literally only produced franchise quarterbacks in the history of its existence. Nobody who's quarterback desperate is going to say no to a Manning, regardless of how shaky the resume is. They're just going to do it, right? So it's not going to take much. So I think he's probably going to declare for this draft. And if he does, that opens up the Browns' options, and that makes it much more likely that they could take a quarterback, given that this is a team that is projected to get the second overall pick right now. And if they lose out, the worst they could do is the third pick in the draft. So that being the range of where the Browns are falling right now, if they can't win a game to end the season, then we're going to see what happens there. But more than likely, it's going to mean that they're in range if Dante Moore comes out. If he doesn't, then it becomes really hard for the Browns to be able to get a quarterback, because then they have to get the number one overall pick, whether it be by trading for it or by getting it outright, which is a little bit less likely. The fifth thing here is Shedor's progress, right? One, does Shedor's progress turn into wins that can affect the Browns' draft position? But two, how do the Browns feel internally about where Shedor is, and how would a new hire, if there is a new head coach here, feel about where Shador is. That will also kind of aid in determining how aggressive the Browns are going to be over a quarterback answer. Let's say the Browns are number 3, the Titans are number 1, and the price to move up from 3 to 1 is a first round pick, right? The Titans want an extra first round pick to move up from 3 to 1. If the Browns had nothing they felt good about on the roster at the quarterback position, they would be very likely to do that. But if they like Shador enough, they're going to have pause about giving up a first round pick, right? All the stuff that you hear from people saying, hey, if the Browns have the pick to take a quarterback, they're going to take it. It's assuming that the Browns are not going to have to trade up to take a quarterback, aren't going to have to make a move to get a quarterback, which right now it seems like that might be the case for the Cleveland Browns. But if that does change, or if the math gets different on what it takes to bring in a quarterback, then how you feel about Shador starts to factor in a little bit more. All in all, these are the 5 things that the Browns have to level with before they make the decision to select a quarterback in this year's draft. Who's going to coach the team? What do they feel about this draft class? What position are they in? How good is Shador? Where does that put them? How good is Shador, and how aggressive are they going to be to try to find somebody who could possibly be better than Shador? And then number 5 or number 4 is Dante Moore. Does he declare? Does he not? Because if there's only one quarterback that can go in that top 5 range, that's a problem for the Browns. If there's 2, then that's an opportunity for the Browns. So we'll see what happens as we go forward, right? Still 3 games left of the season. The Browns could win all 3 of these games, and then this could seem hilarious that we were talking about quarterback in a month. The Browns could lose out and get the number 1 overall pick, and then it's pretty obvious what the Browns might do if they like these quarterbacks in this draft class. We will see what happens as this continues to play itself out. But be open to all options, because all options right now are certainly on the table for how this could play out. But that's my thoughts on the 5 factors that could change up what the Browns do this offseason as far as quarterback is concerned. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.